Okay, so this is the HDMI switcher tutorial for CS390 Independent Study at Calvin University. So in the last tutorial, we left off with the lighting tutorial. So this is the code as of the lighting tutorial. So we're going to be adding HDMI switcher functionality. So in 2 tutorials ago, I showed you guys how to control the projector via RS-232, and that's great. But if this was actually installed in a classroom, you would have an HDMI switcher in the desk where the professor or teacher is teaching, and then all the inputs would plug into that, and then a single HDMI over Ethernet would be sent to the projector. So we don't actually need to do any source switching on the projector itself. We need to use the video switcher. So that's what we're going to implement today. So let me open this file here. So this HDMISwitcher.cs file I found on GitHub thanks to one of our advisors for this independent study. Credit for this user for writing this code. This is not my code. So this C# file contains code for a Crestron HD-MD4X1-4K-4K-E video switcher. And so that is the model of video switcher that we are using for this independent study. If you have a different model, simply change the model here and change the model for the constructor here. And if it's used any other times in this file, make sure you change it there. And make sure that you have the SimplSharp Pro DM namespace added to your project. Otherwise, it will not import this class. And if you need to know how to do that, you go to References, Add Reference, and import the DM DLL here. So I'll just re-import it. And it was already there, so I didn't do anything. But so that's that. So I'm going to close this file. And we are going to add the HDMISwitcher.cs file to our solution in Visual Studio. So to do that, we're going to right-click on the project, add existing item. We're going to go to the desktop or wherever you downloaded this file. You can see added it to the project. If we open it, we can see we have the file here. So we need to copy the namespace and use that namespace in our control system files. So we're going to go using that namespace. Okay, we're going to save. So now that we're using the DMPS3 200 test namespace, we can now declare an object of type HDMI switcher in our control system.cs file. So what we're going to do is I'm going to make a private HDMI switcher called switcher object, and I'm going to assign it, instantiate it at runtime with the constructor. Switcher equals new HDMI switcher. And this HDMI switcher takes 3 arguments. The IP ID, the IP of the switcher itself, and the control system device, which is just this current class, the control system class. So we're going to pass 165 as this first argument. So the lighting is on A4, which is hexadecimal for 164 in decimal. So if you watched the previous lighting video, I showed you how to open Toolbox and view what hexadecimal value the lighting controller is on. So go watch that tutorial for that. But so we switched from A4, which is hex, to 164, which is in decimal. The HDMI switcher doesn't matter what value you pass it for this first argument, as long as it's not using the same value for like the lighting. So 165 is different, so that's fine. 192.168.1.15 is the IP of the HDMI switcher. I'm going to pass this class in as that argument there. And it looks like it's happy with that. But before we code our logic for the HDMI switcher, we're going to make a couple changes to our global variables here. So let's make a private const string. We're going to call this HDMI switcher IP. We're going to set this equal to 192.168.1.15, I believe is what it is. Just makes the code a bit more readable in case the IP changes. You don't need to go hunting in the code to change it. You can just change it at the top. So HDMI switcher IP, perfect. And then let's also declare 4 constant integers. So private const int, we're going to call this HDMI, we're going to call this switcher. Actually, you know what? Desktop input is a better name for it. So we're just going to say, hey, the desktop computer is plugged into HDMI 1 on the switcher. That way, if we're using constant values as our global variables, we don't need to go hunting in the code in case we decide to switch out, you know, the desktop input for the laptop or something along those sorts. Or perhaps the desktop input is changed to a Blu-ray input. We can just refactor it here once and then it changes throughout the code. So we're just going to copy and paste this. The second input is laptop, I believe. Third input should be Blu-ray. And last one is dock camera. This should be 2, 3, and 4. Save that. Okay, so now that those are declared, we need to refactor our HDMI VGA1 to an S-Video button. Since we're not pulling, having the projector do the input switching, we're doing the HDMI switching with that now. So we need to change these. So we're going to refactor this as desktop button. This should be laptop button. This should be Blu-ray button. This should be dock camera button. Cool. So now that we refactored that, our set sources off method is also updated, which we will continue to use. And then it looks like all of these buttons are updated. Cool. So now that that's done, we can start coding our logic. So let's go down here. Projector on and off, we don't need to touch. We can leave those how they are. So the only thing we need to change is we're not sending via RS-232. We're going to be using a method declared in this class here. So if we go to the bottom, there's 2 methods, route video and lock panel. Lock panel basically locks out the switcher from the user being able to press the button to switch the input. You obviously want this locked so that only the touch panel can change it, and someone screwing around in the rack can't accidentally mess things up. So you can lock it with this method. However, if you look up here, whoever created this C# file locks it for us in this try loop here, so we don't need to lock it ourselves. We would only want to use this method to unlock it if we so desire, but I'm not going to do that, so we don't need to use this method here. We are going to want to use route video though. So it looks like it takes a uint and it just assigns the output to whatever we give it. This also doesn't start at index 0, it starts at index 1. So if we pass this 1, HDMI 1 is selected, and 2 and 2 and so forth. I made the mistake of assuming it was index 0 the first time I went through this. So this first block is desktop. So it looks like that's updated, that's updated. Now we just need to do switcher dot route video. We're going to do should be desktop input. Do the same thing here, so this will be laptop switcher dot route video laptop input. This is Blu-ray switcher dot route video, and this should be Blu-ray input. And this is going to be .cam. And this should be switcher dot route video .cam input. We'll save that. Let's just compile it and make sure there's no errors. And it compiled. Okay. So we'll save this. So this code should work. So let's upload this code. But before I do that, I'm going to mention something. We don't need to register the switcher in our control system.cs like we did for the touch panel and the lighting and the RS-232 control, because it's already registered in the HDMISwitcher.cs file. So we don't need to do that. So this is the only code that we need for it to work. So I'm going to upload this code to the processor. And while we do that, we can make our VT project, or update our VT project that we currently have. Okay, so while that uploads, let's open VT. Okay, so let's open our project. That's the wrong file. I want the tutorial file. So we only need to change the label on these 4 buttons. We refactored our names in the code, so in the code it's still 8, 9, 10, and 11. So we don't need to change that, we just need to change the name. So this is desktop, oops. This is laptop. Blu-ray and .camera. Okay, so now these are updated. Let's compile this project with function F12. And we're not going to upload it because we don't have an actual touch panel. So it looks like that's uploaded. We'll minimize that. Now let's open our VTX file, VTZ file. Let's put in our IP, which is 192.168.1.14. Looks like we're connected. I'm not going to turn the projector on because we don't need it, but let's see how the source selection works. Okay, so now we can see that I can switch to the laptop input, the Blu-ray, and the document camera input, but there's a slight bug in our program, and let me show you. So if I'm already on the document camera input and I click it again, the switcher disables all inputs for some reason. This happens with any of the inputs, so if I go to desktop and then click it a second time, it turns it off. So we're going to have to make some modifications to our code to fix that bug, so I'll show you that here in a second. Okay, so there's a pretty easy fix to this. I'll show you what to do here. So what we're going to do is inside of our if-else blocks, we're going to check a second condition. We're going to see if the input is already set to, in this case, desktop. We're just not going to execute this block of code. So to do that, we're going to do and user interface desktop pool value. But if it's not true. So what we're going to do is we're going to check if desktop button was changed, and if the current source is not the desktop, we're going to switch it with this code. That way, if it's already set to the desktop, this logic will fail and this code will not be executed. So all we have to do is just paste this code in for the rest of these here. And this should be laptop button. Blu-ray button. And lastly, document camera button. Okay, so now this should fix our bug here. So let's build this. And upload this. Okay, so it looks like it uploaded, so now let's check and make sure our code fixed the bug. Okay, so if I select desktop, it selects input 1, but if I click it a second time, the logic fails and it doesn't disable the input. So we can see that it works for all inputs. So it looks like that fixed our bug. Okay, so now there's only one problem left to solve, and that is when the projector is turned on, we don't know what input the projector is going to be pulling from. And we need it to pull from HDMI to be able to pull from the HDMI switcher. So what we're going to do is write some code to solve that problem. So we can use our RS-232 commands, which we already made, to just assign it the input whenever the input is changed. So what we'll do is whenever the desktop, laptop, Blu-ray, or dock camera input is selected, we will set the projector to switch to HDMI. There isn't really a better way to do this because we can't just call comport.send here because the projector might not be on yet when this code is ran, and we can't just call send inside the on block because the projector has to warm up for a couple seconds before it can accept commands. So the best way to do this is just to be safe and to switch it to HDMI whenever the input is changed, even if we don't have to. Obviously, the first time the projector's booted up and it switches, that's great. But obviously, you know, if the user switches the inputs multiple times during the day, it's already going to be on HDMI. But this is the safest way to do it. The better way to do it would be to communicate via RS-232 and get the current state of the projector, and if it's not on HDMI, switch it. However, since it's the end of the school year and we've ran out of time in this independent study, we will not be implementing that. But that is the way that Adam Tozer currently does it, I believe, in classrooms, is he gets the current state and he switches it if he needs to. At least I believe that's how he does it. So now instead of putting our code in each of these blocks, I'm just going to put it in our set sources off method. That way I only need to add the code once and reduce redundancy. But first I'm going to refactor this method, set sources off, and set to HDMI. I guess you can't have an ampersand. Okay, so what I'm going to do is do comport.send projector HDMI string plus the delimiter. Okay, so essentially whenever set source is off and set to HDMI is called, the projector will switch to HDMI. The first time this is called, great, it'll switch to HDMI. Build it. And let me upload it here. Okay, so it looks like our new code has been uploaded. So I'm going to turn the projector on. Okay, so we can see that the projector is currently on VGA 1. So if I select laptop, you can see that it switched to HDMI. And you can see that each time I switch the input, the projector will just automatically switch to HDMI. I'm going to turn the projector off. So that concludes the HDMI switcher tutorial for Crestron Independent Study at Kelvin University.